What is up, everybody? It is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Monday edition, the injury and waiver wire edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, coming out of week 3. I want to say an exciting week 3. I don't know. Sunday there's something about Sunday. We continue to see offenses struggle. We continue to see bad quarterback play. But you know what? It is the NFL, and it is exciting. And we're going to be talking about a lot of that as we do every single Monday afternoon over on YouTube, the Sharp Football Analysis YouTube. So go and check that out. And if I'm talking about injuries, there's only one person to talk about that with over here at Sharp Football Analysis, and that is Tucker Bagley, who is having an interesting season with his Eagles. We had to do the show early last week to accommodate the Monday night game that Tucker had to go and be at, and so we did that, and it looked like it was going great, and then didn't go so great. And then this past week against the Saints, it looked like it wasn't going so great. And then all of a sudden it was great. I don't know what to do with this Eagles team, Tucker. It's the strangest. We've had the strangest, what is there now, counting just football weeks. We've had like the strangest 12-week run of an NFL team that I can remember. It's just odd what's going on with these Eagles.
Yeah, I don't know if winning ugly is something you should be proud of after doing it for 20 plus weeks. Eventually you might just not be good enough to beat teams handedly. Style points I think are a thing in the regular season, but hey, as long as they keep it interesting, as long as people are talking about them, that's all right. We'll keep it going.
Just as a note, we are recording this. If you're not watching us live, we are recording this ahead of Monday Night Football. So we're not going to be talking about anything that happens on Monday Night Football. If there are some injuries there, if there's some kind of waiver wire developments there, you can read about that in Tucker's injury column and my waiver wire column over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. So make sure you do that. I do want to start the show with an amazing performance that we saw from a guy who was available on the waiver wire last week, a guy I wrote up but did not have nearly high enough in my rankings, and that was Jauan Jennings, who went for 11 catches, 175 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Basically, on the back of that performance alone, he is currently the wide receiver 2 in half PPR scoring in fantasy leagues. That is where we are with Jauan Jennings. I was too low on Jauan Jennings last week in the waiver column, and that's, flat out, I'm not going to make any excuses. I was too low on him. Obviously had him as an ad, but I had him behind like Quentin Johnson and the Rams guys. That wouldn't have been the case if I had known that George Kittle was going to be out. And so we can talk a little bit about that injury here in just a second. But either way, that was wrong. But what I think is interesting is that we've had Deebo Samuel miss time before. We've had Brandon Ayuk miss time before. And the reason I didn't have Jennings as high as maybe I should have is because we didn't see Jennings really have this explosion. In fact, the guy that benefits the most or had previously benefited the most from either Ayuk or Samuel being out was George Kittle. And so that's one of kind of the reasons I wasn't as high on Jennings. But now that Kittle's out too, when they talked about the Samuel injury, they said he's going to miss a few weeks. We're going to seem like he's going to be out as well. I mean, the question moving forward will be what happens to Jennings if Samuel or Kittle return. Maybe we're only going to get like 1 week out of this. But I'm more interested in where you think we are with Samuel and Kittle, how much more time we're missing from them, because ultimately I think that decides how aggressively you're going in on Jennings in leagues where he wasn't picked up. And shockingly, he wasn't picked up in like 64% of ESPN leagues or something like that.
Yeah, I think Kittle's going to be back before Deebo, just the way everything kind of unfolded last week. Deebo was ruled out almost immediately by Kyle Shanahan after the game, said he has a groin injury. He's out. We'll probably be out a couple of weeks. At least with Kittle, there was, maybe some hope that he could play this weekend. I didn't really think it was the case, but it was never, in doubt from the outset of last week as to whether or not he would play due to that, with that hamstring injury. So I think Kittle is back before Samuel. Maybe he's back in week 5 and, Samuel after that. But my question is, when it comes to the 49ers, what does Brandon Ayuk have to do to get involved in the offense? Because this is a guy who got paid, who I think if you were someone like me who might have invested in him in fantasy, and you see all these other weapons go down, and you see Christian McCaffrey not start this season on the roster, and you see Kittle go down, and you see Samuel go down, and you think finally this week they have to throw to him because there's no other option. Yeah. And then Jauan Jennings was out and has the best performance of the year. I put up something like 46 points in PPR leagues. And Brandon Ayuk right now has 13 catches for 160 yards through 3 games. I mean, I know it's just a small sample size and probably a byproduct of the offense, and I wouldn't rule out him having a big week coming up. But fascinating to see a guy who got paid all that money after, such a long, extended, drawn out, contract negotiation. He's been completely missing the first 3 weeks of the season, despite all his other co-stars not being on the field.
Well, I mean, I want to say is we got the usage we wanted out of Ayuk. This has always been the problem with the 49ers pass catchers is that there's so many of them that they have to live on efficiency. And Brandon Ayuk's been able to do that. Deebo Samuel's able to do it somewhat because of efficiency, but also because he gets the carries. Christian McCaffrey's able to do it because he just scores a touchdown every game. And as it turns out, if you just get 20 touches every game and score touchdowns as a fantasy running back, that's pretty good. And so he's able to do it that way. And then George Kittle is just up and down. Some weeks it's there, some weeks it's not. But from a like per touch perspective, he's one of the best fantasy tight ends we have. It's just a matter if he gets touches. With Ayuk, the reason we were all excited about them this week is because we thought he was going to get the touches and the targets, and he did. He ended up with 10 targets. Like if you're getting Brandon Ayuk with 10 targets, you're feeling pretty good about where you stand. There were just a couple of misconnections there. He only had 5 catches for 48 yards. It's certainly not what you wanted. And then you saw Jauan Jennings have this massive game. But I'm not worried about Ayuk. If Samuel continues to miss, if Kittle continues to miss, I think I might be a little more worried about Kittle than you because it was that practice injury and because you're right, they left open the possibility. Like he was only doubtful or was even questionable at the final report.
I
But
think
the fact that he then missed,
Sunday.
he was questionable. Yeah. The fact that he missed that practice on Friday right after it, like that's. I don't know. I really worry about those midweek injuries. I mean, we saw it last week with, Dameon Pierce. And that was one of the reasons I was high on Akers. It was like, well, Pierce probably isn't playing. And if Mixon doesn't, it's going to be Akers. And that kind of worked out, but not great. But, there we are. So I think maybe we're going to miss both of them for a while. And if that's the case, Ayuk's going to be fine. But yeah, I think if both of those guys are out, now we're moving to Jennings. If only one of them is out, if Kittle and Samuel come back, I don't think we're going to see a lot of this again from Jennings. But if both of them are out, I mean, I'm feeling pretty good about Jennings moving forward.
Yeah, me too. It's an offense that we've seen Kyle Shanahan have success with a number of different receivers and weapons in that game. You've kind of seen what Jordan Mason has been able to do as sort of the focal point of that offense, taking over the Christian McCaffrey role. So as long as Brock Purdy's getting the ball out and not turning it over and distributing, I mean, just being a high volume target in, one of the top offenses in the NFL, just a good place to be.
It doesn't hurt when you're in a very, very super efficient offense. So we have a lot going on over at the website, by the way, at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Like I said, my waiver column, every single week I'll be writing a waiver column. I was apparently very high on Cam Akers last week. I had no idea that people weren't like there were leagues he just wasn't even picked up in. He was available for $1. That was very odd to me. I was high on him last week. Obviously wasn't as high on Jennings, but if you want to know my thoughts on the entire waiver wire, I'll talk about a little bit about it here. But you can find it over at Sharp Football Analysis. I release it every Tuesday morning, maybe even Monday nights, kind of moving forward. And I go deep in that article. I go through a lot of players that are available in 95+% leagues because I know a lot of you are not in my league degenerates like me. And so that's available. You can also find Tucker writing up injuries for every single team, updates for every single team over at Sharp Football Analysis. But most importantly, you can find Rich Rebar's worksheet previews of every single game, every single week, all the noteworthy fantasy players in every team. He previews that every single week. It's a massive undertaking. It is one of the best things that you can read in the business to get ready for a fantasy football weekend. That's available as part of our fantasy package, which you can get for 25% off using promo code TAKE25. So make sure you go and do that. All right, let's move on to talk about some of the injuries. There was an interesting one that popped up right here before we started recording. We saw Jaylen Warren on Sunday get taken out of the game in the third quarter. Mike Tomlin said that he wasn't running quite right, and so they wanted to make sure that everything was fine. Looks like he's going to go for an MRI on his knee. But we saw Najee Harris, I think, finish that game. I don't remember him leaving that game. But then reports come out today on Monday of him having his arm in a sling in the locker room. And all of a sudden now we're in this really interesting situation where, Warren, we don't know. Warren came into the season hurt as well, not with a knee, but with a hamstring injury. Now Harris is in a sling. I mean, it's a confusing situation with really not a lot of information that we're dealing with in the Steelers backfield.
No, that's what's tough about like a Monday morning injury is we aren't going to know anything about Najee Harris until Wednesday when the first injury report comes out. You're right. He didn't miss any time yesterday. I think he ran the ball 18 times. He took the last carry of the game for Pittsburgh. So it wasn't like he, subbed out at the very end, kind of like Amari Cooper did at the end of the Browns game, and he's dealing with an undisclosed injury. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a mystery. He was just seen wandering around the locker room with a sling on. So he's dealing with an arm or a shoulder injury. You mentioned Jaylen Warren. He has a knee injury after coming into the season with a hamstring injury that limited him in training camp in the preseason. So the two dominant forces in the Pittsburgh backfield, as far as touch share goes, are now both out, at least this week. We'll see if they play on Sunday. They'll be out of practice probably. And now Cordero Patterson is left as the only man standing in the backfield, just in a war of attrition. Bet on Cordero Patterson.
Bet on Cordero Patterson with Arthur Smith. Find you someone who loves you the way that Arthur Smith loves Cordero Patterson. But yeah, he's the only other running back on the roster right now. They will add people. They have, I believe. Do you remember that Jets running back that randomly had a good game like 3 years ago? They have one of those guys on their practice squad, I think. But if Najee Harris is out, and I'm not like that might not be the case. We really don't have a lot of information about it. His arm in a sling is a really big concern, especially for the position that he plays and the way he plays the running back position. That is certainly a major concern. We saw Cordero Patterson come in and have 4 carries and 3 targets in the second half against the Chargers. Jaylen Warren, as I mentioned, missed most of that half because of his knee injury. We know that Patterson in week 1, when Warren was still coming back from that hamstring injury, we saw Patterson get involved as well. So even if Najee Harris is playing, Patterson is going to get some work, and that's obviously worth a look, at least in very deep leagues. But if Harris is out, or if we have any inclinations Harris is out, then yeah, you're all in on Patterson as a maybe 1 week fill-in. Now, that said, it probably is only going to be, depending on what news we get, and hopefully we get news before Tuesday night, it probably is only going to be a week or two. And in that case, if you already have a strong team, maybe this isn't something you're going and get after. But if you are a zero RB person who's just trying to fill starts until you figure this thing out, yeah, Patterson might be somebody that ends up being a starter this week, like Cam Akers was last week. I mean, remember the news at the beginning of last week with Joe Mixon? We're all scared about, Joe Mixon's probably fine. He's probably fine. And then he didn't practice all week and was out. We'll see what happens with Najee. But if he follows that, then maybe Patterson's in line for a start. So yeah, it's a tough situation as we're recording here on Monday afternoon. Hopefully we're going to get a lot more information before waivers start to run on Tuesday night and then on Wednesday morning. But yeah, Patterson is certainly someone at this point you're going to have to target on the wire.
Yeah, and you mentioned he's not a guy that's going to win you your league. He's not a guy that's going to necessarily be an impact player a month from now. But as far as short term, when we're looking at the waiver wire and who could possibly be available and maybe help you in week 4 or week 5, it's hard to find a guy who might just be thrust into the starting role, the number 1 running back role next to Justin Fields there for a week or maybe 2, depending on what Harris's situation is moving forward.
Justin Fields, by the way, is still available in more leagues than I think he should be, given that at this point, I can't imagine them going from Fields to Russell Wilson. Like I just can't imagine that happening regardless of Russell Wilson's health. And so, and we know what Justin Fields is in his ability as a runner and what he can do from a fantasy perspective, even if he isn't, connecting on long plays to Calvin Austin, right? We know what he can do as a fantasy player. So check and see if Justin Fields, if you're in a 1 quarterback league, you're hurting for whatever reason, go and check that out. Speaking of quarterbacks, Justin Herbert, he came into this past week with an ankle injury. We knew that was there. We didn't really know if he was going to play when we recorded this last week. He ended up playing through it, but then aggravated the injury at one point in the game, ended up having to be taken out, was in a walking boot. It's one of these odd situations because I assume that Herbert probably is going to want to keep playing. The way that Harbaugh talked about it after the game was like, if he ever started limping, we were taking him out. It seems like they're going to want to be more, I can't even think of the word, but they're going to be more careful with this injury. They have a bye in week 5. I kind of think Herbert's probably not playing this week. Are you with me on that one?
Yeah, I just think it would make sense for them. And, maybe Easton Stick isn't the best backup option if you're trying to.
Well, he's not even the backup. Taylor Heineke.
That's right. They have Heineke now.
Taylor Heineke came into the game, and that was that was one of the conversations going into the game was that about, well, who's the actual backup? And there you go, Taylor Heineke, I guess, is the backup. Is where we are right now.
But that week 5 bye just brings an interesting point to where if you decide to give Herbert this week, and it's reported that it's a high ankle sprain that he aggravated, and we talked about high ankle sprains back in week 1 after Jordan Love got hurt on that Friday night game against the Eagles. High ankle sprains can be like a 6-week injury, maybe an 8-week injury, depending on how long it can be. And for him to come back after 2 weeks, it would be impressive. But I think right now you're in a situation where if you give him week 4 to rest and try and rehab the ankle, you have all week 5 as a bye. I mean, giving him 2 entire weeks off before he has to come back on the field in week 6. I don't know who the Chargers play coming off their bye week there, but it sets up an interesting point with Justin Herbert to where you can kind of buy that extra week of time for him and only have him miss one game and hope he comes back, better than he would have been if you try to force him through game 4 and only give him the bye week off.
It is an added kind of wrinkle here that they do get the Chiefs this week at home. I believe the Chiefs at home this week, and that's obviously a massive game. If the Chargers are what they want to be now, sitting here at I believe 2-1, what they want to be, that's obviously a massive game for them, a massive game for him, and so for Herbert. So we'll see kind of what happens with that. On Heineke, I mean, he took 3 sacks and 5 dropbacks, which isn't great in that game. 2 were not really his fault, to be fair to him. 2 were not really his fault, but one probably was. And so, we'll see how it goes. And ultimately for fantasy, I mean, I have a tough time getting excited about this passing game outside of the legend Quentin Johnson, who only scores touchdowns now. He catches all the passes thrown his way and only scores touchdowns. And I'm very happy for him that it's working out for him. But you have a tough time getting excited about this passing game because even if Herbert's in there, in their ideal world, they're not going to be throwing enough for it to matter for fantasy. So, what are you going to do? Let's talk about another quarterback here. Sam Darnold only missed a play with a knee injury, but after the game, they said they were going to get that knee injury looked at. What's the latest news here on Sam Darnold?
Yeah, I saw there's no structural damage on the knee, which is certainly a good sign that it's more of a sprain than a tear in anything. And Sam Darnold, even though he's dealt with injury issues for most of his career, it's always been shoulder or back or mono. Remember when Sam Darnold had mono as a member of the Jets?
It was a random, it was like 3 weeks, right? Like it wasn't like a 1 week. If I'm remembering correctly, it wasn't like 1 week. He missed numerous games with mono. If I'm remembering,
yeah, it was a multi-week issue that Sam Darnold had mono. One of the many things that derailed Sam Darnold's time with the Jets. But he's never really dealt with a knee injury or really a leg injury before in his NFL career. So this is something I think that if there's some structural damage, if it's just a sprain, maybe they do sit him for a week just to be cautionary. But you mentioned he came back in the game, he was able to finish the rest of the game. I think best case scenario, he's limited in practice all week, maybe pops up as questionable heading into week 4. But I do think there's a pretty decent shot that he would play this week for the Vikings.
Right, quick fun trivia game. How old do you think Sam Darnold is?
He's 27.
You know it off the top of your head.
No, I saw someone tweet earlier. He's like a month younger than Joe Burrow.
I think that's true. Yeah, I think he's a month younger than Joe. This is really, we live in a very interesting quarterback world. He's a month. Joe Burrow was born in December, and Sam Darnold was born in June. All right, so he's 6 months younger than 6 months younger than Joe Burrow.
Also, just reported that Darnold has a knee bruise, is what they're calling it. So he isn't expected to miss any time.
Yeah, I mean, I would suspect he's going to play. We also got Justin Jefferson said he jammed his finger, but they did x-rays and he's fine. So it looks like everything is going to work out here for the Vikings. Also interesting, I heard Kevin O'Connell talking about Jordan Addison, who was DNP again all week last week with his ankle injury, but he kind of seemed to express some optimism he'll return this week. And so the Vikings, with obviously coming off another big win, looks like they avoided any major injuries, and it looks like they're going to be able to keep this thing going. They're going to play Green Bay this week. Obviously a massive game there. One thing I do want to say, because I looked at these stats, so I want to say them because I looked them up for it. But if for whatever reason Sam Darnold's not able to play and Nick Mullins has to start, and Nick Mullins 3 starts last year, he threw for 303 yards, 411 yards, and 396 yards. Now, the defense wasn't as good as it is now, and so maybe we're not going to see that again. But Justin Jefferson with Mullins went 7 for 84, 6 for 141 and 1, and 12 for 192 and 1. So if Nick Mullins starts, Justin Jefferson managers, you're not going to have to worry about that. And we might be interested in some Nick Mullins if he ends up having to start this week. Let's move on to your beloved DeVonta Smith, who I don't want to ever call a player dirty. And it seems like it was like the player wasn't dirty, but that hit on DeVonta Smith with him wrapped up, the play over, and like coming back towards him from the defensive lineman, I was not happy with that hit. I can't imagine that that the Eagles' offensive linemen were happy with that hit. Either way, left that game in the concussion protocol. What kind of can we expect from this?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough. The thing with concussion protocol, so there are 5 stages of concussion protocol, and you really have to progress through one every day. So if the Eagles were playing on Thursday, you'd pretty much already be ruled out. It's kind of impossible to go from Sunday to Thursday, but he seemed okay getting off the field. He seemed to kind of know where he was. He was able to walk off under his own power, which was incredible just in and of itself when he first saw the hit and saw his helmet go flying. Sure seemed like it would be a situation where he'd have to be carted off the field. But he seemed kind of with it, going to the locker room, tried hyping up the crowd. So I would give him an outside shot of playing in week 4, much like the Chargers. The Eagles have a week 5 bye, and now those injuries are kind of mounting offensively. A.J. Brown still dealing with that hamstring injury. Lane Johnson left the game in the first half with a concussion as well. They also lost right guard Mekhi Becton with an arm injury. DeVonta Smith, obviously, with a concussion. So it almost feels like a situation kind of like Justin Herbert, where you just kind of try to scrape through whatever you can. Maybe get Jahan Dotson and Dallas Goedert some more touches in week 4 against Tampa Bay. You recoup in week 5, and you get ready to go with your, entire arsenal in tow for week 6. But I think there's an outside shot DeVonta Smith plays. I don't know if they're more eager to get him on the field, because I don't think A.J. Brown is going to play in week 4. But at the same point, a concussion isn't necessarily something you want to take lightly, and you can't really force a guy through concussion protocol. So I would say, maybe like a 20% chance he plays in week 4, but I would definitely lean on the side of being cautious and him sitting out till week 6.
Speaking of former Jets, Mekhi Becton having a career resurgence is also an
The Eagles thing
interesting.
of just like taking the biggest humans possible and putting them at guard. Like they did the same thing with Brandon Brooks when they signed him from Houston, turned him into an all-pro player. I mean, it's hilarious seeing a guy that big. It's like 6'5", 350. Him playing guard is the funniest thing.
Yeah, he's so tall. I'm glad you mentioned Brown. I was going to ask you about him. So from what I heard from you, to be fair, I was looking up Mekhi Becton to make sure I was remembering correctly. But
Former Jets first-round pick.
Yes, I was making sure I was right about that, because every time I hear them talk about Becton, and I knew he was there and I knew everything, but every time my brain is like, that can't be. You know how like when you know something, but your brain is convinced to trying to tell you there's no way that's possible. That's how I feel about Becton being a guard for the Eagles. But with AJ Brown, like he's not. You feel pretty confident that he's not playing this week. Like we're going to be missing him because of the bye 2 more weeks. Is that kind of where you are?
I think so. I mean, he told Adam Schefter before Monday Night Football last week that he expects it to be out a couple weeks, expects it to be a multi-week injury. So obviously just Monday night and now this week would be 2. But I would think because of him being the Eagles' best player, chances are he will be out again, and they'll hold him out until after the bye week and hope that he's ready for week 6. So never say never. I mean, he's just an athletic freak. This is really the first time he's missed any time since coming to the Eagles, although he did get hurt in week 18 last year and missed their playoff game in Tampa Bay. But I think for the most part, I would say that it's a really, really good chance that they just hold him out until after the bye.
PPR legend Britton Covey also hurt. So they can't.
Yeah, he's in a sling too. I think it was reported today. They think he has a broken bone in his arm, so he's probably done for a little while. So yeah, the Eagles receiving core, which I wasn't really high on their depth. They really built their receiving core around 2 guys, and now they're both out, and your third guy is out. So maybe this is what Jahan Dotson needs to get involved in the offense after they traded a 3rd-round pick for him a month ago.
Yeah, so that's the kind of what are we looking at here if both those guys miss. There were 9 dropbacks without DeVonta Smith on the field in that game against the Saints. Paris Campbell was on the field for all 9 of them. He had 0 targets on those. John Dotson was on the field for all 9 of them. He had 2 targets. And then my guy, my favorite sleeper in the world, Johnny Wilson, was on the field for 7 of those with 1 target. I'm from like a waiver wire perspective, I kind of lean on maybe one of these guys pops. I think picking which one of them, or even if any of them really have a massive game, even if Smith or Brown are out, is going to be really, really tough. Like I would have to be in dire straits to go hard after any of these guys. Like you said, they spent a 3rd round pick on Dotson. I guess it would be him. Paris Campbell, I believe, still resides on the practice squad, so they're having to elevate him. Johnny Wilson's a rookie, obviously still trying to find his way, and has been dealing with injury issues of his own. And so I guess I would go with Dotson, but ultimately, I mean, they might just try to run the ball a lot, throw the ball to Dallas Goedert. I was 1 week early on Dallas Goedert overs. I wish I would have done the same thing this week. It didn't work out for me against the Falcons, but it worked out here. And ultimately, you still have like the specter that Brown, I agree with you based on that report from Schefter. We're probably not seeing Brown this week, but you still have the specter that Brown could return, that Smith could clear the protocol because he does have the full week. And, we've seen that happen before. And so you put all that together, and it's going to be really tough for me to spend a lot of fab on any of these guys, especially since we don't really know who the targets would even go to if both of Brown and Smith even missed the game.
Yeah, because it wasn't like Jalen Hurts really spread the ball around after they were out, right? It was pretty much just Dallas Goedert, who probably isn't available on the waiver wire. Saquon Barkley, who definitely isn't available in any league so far. I mean, instead of kind of widening the receivers who got a target share, it narrowed pretty quickly to just the guys who were left. So yeah, I just obviously over the course of a full game, the ball has to go elsewhere besides the tight end and running back. But you mentioned it's such a crowded space, and I don't know what kind of target share would be out there anyway for those guys. So it's kind of just like taking a lottery ticket and hoping maybe one of them busts off a big play. But the Eagles offense hasn't really been tremendously explosive anyway, outside of Saquon Barkley's big run. So it would be a tough situation. If you're in dire straits, there's an opportunity there. But I don't feel great about any of the options and feeling comfortable expecting one of them to really take off this week.
Let's talk about another guy with a week 5 bye that has an injury going into week 4, and that's Sam LaPorta, who has an ankle injury that, if I remember correctly, he played through, but I'm not sure how comfortable he was on that ankle coming out of this week.
Yeah, he was carted off the field after suffering the ankle. It was on the hook and ladder play. He caught it blocking. And then he came back in the second half. He played. I don't think he caught a ball after. He finished with only 2 catches and 36 yards, I think.
To be fair, that is a normal 2024 Sam LaPorta stat line. Unfortunately, that's just what his stat lines look like. That might not be injury related.
No, I mean that's every tight end, right? Like outside of week 1, Isaiah Likely, and week 3, Dallas Goedert. Like that's every other tight end. As Travis Kelce has like 50 yards through 3 games,
something
right?
Like that.
7 catches for 50 yards. But yeah, he played through the second half. Dan Campbell told reporters today that he's considered day-to-day. So another guy who I think is probably, if he's limited in practice on Wednesday and Thursday, there's a good shot that he will play. But same thing, that week 5 bye looming, maybe they give him an extra week off when he isn't necessarily a key part of their offensive game plan on a week-to-week basis right now. But considering he played through, considering that they are calling him day-to-day, I wouldn't be shocked if you were out on the field on Sunday.
Yeah, and I'm not sure there's really a fantasy takeaway here. Brock Wright would be the next man up. He did get 5 targets against the Cardinals, which was second most on the team. But only one of those came without Sam LaPorta on the field. And so, feels a little fluky. If LaPorta were to miss, I just assume they would run the offense through Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, and the 2 running backs. I assume that's just what we would get. And I wouldn't really be chasing Brock Wright outside of, DFS if he's going to come in minimum priced. And I haven't looked at the pricing yet this week. And, maybe in deeper tight end premium leagues, I'm not really chasing Brock Wright. But, it is there. That is certainly an option. Another tight end, another big name tight end who hasn't necessarily lived up to the billing is Trey McBride with, I don't know what to ask you about this because it's a lot like DeVonta Smith. He's in the concussion protocol, and that kind of is what it is at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, concussion protocol, it's so black and white, right? And same thing. He took a big helmet hit from Brian Branch in that game. But with how structured concussion protocol is, it's hard to tell. Like, we really won't know anything until Thursday at the earliest as to how he's progressing. I mean, usually just as a rule of thumb, I tend to think concussions are automatically 1 week out, and you come back the week after at the earliest. A couple years ago, I tracked concussions for the entire season for Warren, and very rarely does a guy get to come back the week after entering concussion protocol. So I would assume it's probably a week 5 return for Trey McBride, but never say never, I guess. But like I said, it's such a gray area right now, and it's so rigid trying to get back through concussion protocol. It's not like one guy can heal faster than the other because you have to go through each of the 5 steps.
I do want to mention, you mentioned the Brian Branch injury. We talk about almost exclusively offensive injuries here because we're dealing with the waiver wire. There are some really potentially impactful defensive injuries. Brian Branch is one of those. Myles Garrett is one of those as well. But we don't hit on those, but there's certainly some impactful ones there. As for Trey McBride, if he misses time, we probably want to go after receivers in this offense, even if it's just for DFS, because they're going to get the Commanders this week. They're home against the Commanders in week 4, and that's a spot you want to be. I mean, I guess we're recording this before Monday night. We'll see kind of how the Commanders do on Monday night, but I feel pretty confident this is going to be a spot you want. I think it's interesting that Greg Dortch has been the target on 4 of the 15 pass plays the Cardinals have run without Trey McBride on the field this year, which makes some sense. They operate very similar parts of the field. So that's very interesting for Greg Dortch, especially in deeper leagues. Greg Dortch is available. He had that big game week 1, but people dropped him again. He is available in over 95% of ESPN leagues. And so he is out there for sure. Michael Wilson's coming off a 9-target game, running nearly every route. Michael Wilson is not going to play in the same areas as Trey McBride, but maybe that's not what they want to do. Maybe they're trying to get more big plays, get him involved. And so, Michael Wilson is interesting. And then from a tight end perspective, again, if we're trying to just punt at tight end and DFS, Elijah Higgins ran a route on 4 of the 8 plays without McBride in week 3, got 1 target. And he has a very interesting athletic profile. I believe he's a second-year player. He was a wide receiver at Stanford. He ran a 4.5 440 with a 10'6" broad jump at 6'3", 235 pounds at the combine. So he's a very interesting kind of athletic receiving type of tight end. He would be the next guy up you would expect to maybe get some of those McBride targets. So if you're again, like with Brock Wright, I'm more interested in Higgins. We'll see what happens with McBride. I'm always worried about concussions, like you said, that people are just going to miss a week, because that seems to be generally what happens as people take things correctly, are very careful with these types of injuries. And so Higgins, especially if you're in a deep league, tight end premium, Higgins is someone that I'm interested in, at least in those types of leagues. Let's talk about a few more wide receivers here. We had Tank Dell had a hand injury that seemed to be nothing. DJ Moore, I think, missed a play or 2 with a knee injury. Seems like that was nothing. But you mentioned at the top, Amari Cooper. We just don't really know what's going on with Amari Cooper. Obviously had a big game, breakout game, 2 touchdowns, excited about that, but then left the game at the end. And like, it seems like there's just not a ton of information out there about this injury.
Yeah, I mean, he was interviewed after the game. He was available for media at his locker, and he told everyone he's good, he's fine. But he got hurt on the second to last play of the game. Was able to walk off the field under his own power. Obviously, he didn't return because the game was over. But it's also worth noting that the team mentioned that he's dealing with an undisclosed injury right now. So same thing. That's something we're gonna have to wait till the first injury report on Wednesday to get more clarification. But finally, a big game for Amari Cooper. I mean, that passing offense seemed to click a little bit against the Giants. So hopefully he is back there in week 4 and can kind of build on 87-yard, 2-touchdown performance.
I would say that Amari Cooper clicked against the Giants. I don't know about the passing game as a whole. I still think, it's still rough. Watson still didn't top 200 yards. He did get his 2 touchdown throws to Cooper, still didn't top 200 yards. Watson is ahead of just Will Levis and Bryce Young among qualified quarterbacks in EPA per play. He's ahead of just Young in EPA per pass attempt. It's not good, folks. It's not good.
Yeah, but how did that
on
Panthers offense do without Bryce Young?
That was one of the more, the fact that they're gonna keep using Bryce Young, and they're probably going to start him at some point again this year, and they need to try to figure out what they have in him, and that's fine. Maybe he just needed a break. He was a number 1 pick for a reason, right? and he wasn't like a number one pick everybody was shocked about. We're not going to do any like revisionist history here that everybody's like, I can't believe you took Bryce Young. That was, even if you like Stroud more than Young, as by the way, this website did, everybody I think on this website did, even if you liked him more, you weren't like, oh, I can't believe they took Bryce Young at the number one pick. So they're gonna give him a shot. But I do wonder if they actually did all the reports we saw on Sunday morning that they got trade offers for Bryce Young. I do wonder if they're a little bit regretful now that they didn't trade Young before the rest of the world saw what this offense looked like with Andy Dalton and what Deontay Johnson could do with Andy Dalton. Because when you watch that, you really get a full view of how much Bryce Young was holding back this offense, and it's not a great look. It's not a great look. But back to the Browns, with how bad they've been on offense, with how bad that passing game has been, like Jameis Winston has to be on Superflex rosters. He is in all of my Superflex leagues. I assume he is. But if you're in a Superflex league and he's not rostered, he's still out there on the waiver wire, you should pick him up because to me, with how bad this has been, and Watson, was better in week 2 than he was in week 1. And he, like you said, he did have 2 touchdowns in this game, but like, it's just not working. And I wonder how much longer they can continue to do this. The running game isn't going to save them. We'll see when Nick Chubb is able to come back, how healthy he is when he's able to come back. The offensive line has issues as well. Like it just isn't working. And I wonder how much longer we're going here before we see Winston. So if I have him on some Superflex rosters, and I think he probably should be rostered in those leagues.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a couple weeks ago. It's just
You're muted. Sorry, Tucker.
Am I still muted?
Oh no, the mic is gone. All right, I'm gonna keep monologuing here for just a second with Adam Thielen. So Adam Thielen, hamstring injury, picked up a hamstring injury whenever. Oh, apparently Tucker was fine and he heard him, and I don't hear him. So maybe I'm wrong. Go ahead, Tucker. I'm gonna
No, I
lower
mean,
my
if you don't want to
headphones.
hear me talk about Deshaun Watson again, by all means, and we can talk about, something else. We can talk about Adam Thielen. We can talk about how well that Panthers offense looked with, league average quarterback play. But for the most part, you're right. Like investment in Deshaun Watson aside, the trade and the contract and everything else. Eventually, you just have to. You owe it to a defense, although the defense didn't really play that well on Sunday, but you owe it to your fan base to eventually just turn the page, right, and try something else. The Panthers were laughed at last week for what they did to Bryce Young and everything, and the way they switched to Andy Dalton and maybe prematurely ended Bryce Young's time with the team or as a starting franchise quarterback. But you mentioned that report that they're turning down trades for him means they may still have something invested in his future, but you just saw the way the offense worked better with a little bit of competency at the quarterback position. And if Jameis Winston can give them that and can unlock this offense, and, if Nick Chubb comes back and helps the ground game get going, I mean, there is still some talent on this Browns roster. I think, Stefanski's still a decent head coach, but I think moving forward, if something doesn't change soon, you can't just throw away another wasted season because of what you tried to do 2 years ago.
We're back. I can hear you finally.
Sides?
I have no idea. I have no idea what happened, but from what I heard, yeah, you're right. We're in sunk cost fallacy. We're in sunk cost fallacy range here with Watson for sure. All right, let's move on. Adam Thielen, hamstring injury. I'm gonna guess he misses some time. Are you there with me?
Yeah, I like a 34-year-old's hamstrings. I don't know how quickly they recover. So I think it's going to be a little bit, which is a shame because I thought Adam Thielen could have a decent year this year. He put up over 1,000 yards last year, kind of a resurgent season. And you saw what he was able to do with Andy Dalton at quarterback. Obviously, Deontay Johnson had the biggest game, but he offers a little bit of reliability. And as of right now, it seems like it'll be a couple weeks just due to his age and due to the nature of a soft tissue injury.
Yeah, you mentioned, I agree with you. And then you mentioned Deontay Johnson, and obviously he's not available on waiver wires. That that could be wrong. He could have been dropped in a few leagues after what we saw the first 2 weeks, but he's not available in the vast majority of leagues. He was targeted on 45% of his routes with Adam Thielen off the field in week 3. 45% of his routes Deontay Johnson was targeted on, which is a wild number. Like Tyreek Hill is like in the low 30s and he's always at the top of the list. That is a wild number. One interesting thing from a waiver wire perspective with the Adam Thielen news is that we saw Xavier Legette run around on 90% of the team dropbacks without Thielen, which is interesting because he had been kind of playing behind Jonathan Mingo, but we saw Jonathan Mingo moved into the slot to replace Thielen, and that opened up things for Legette. There have now been 33 routes run without Thielen on the field this season. Legette has been on the field for 33 pass plays. Legette has run a route on 31 of those. And so that's a really big number for him. If we're going to start getting him in that kind of like 90 to 95% route participation, then all of a sudden you might be interested in Legette, especially if Andy Dalton keeps this Panthers offense moving. That said, we actually haven't seen him earn that many targets. We still need to see him earn targets. He's still rostered in a shocking number of leagues, given what happened. I mean, I obviously it's because he's a rookie and he was an early pick, and that's the way it goes. But still, everything about what we saw after Thielen left is promising for Legette, and so he's certainly someone I'm keeping tabs on as we get into the waiver wire. We have Jayman in the chat saying if Winston plays, it's because Watson is injured, because I don't think Winston fares much better. You might be right. That's certainly true. The offensive line is not doing any favors, but if you look at what we've seen from Watson, and it's been limited and it's been like short stints because of injuries and everything. If you see what we've seen from Watson since he got to Cleveland, this is just a continuation of that. And that's such a long period of time now that this has been happening. Maybe not a long series of games, to be fair to him, but it's a long period of time it's been happening. I feel like they got to try something, but maybe it's going to be just as bad moving forward if we've got Winston.
Yeah, I mean, Jameis Winston's never been a steady hand, right? Like when we talk about Andy Dalton being, an average and kind of raising the floor of that offense, it's not exactly what Jameis Winston has been known for in his time in the NFL.
You give me another 30-30 season, I'm all in on that, though. A 30-30 season for Jerry Jeudy and for Amari Cooper. The fantasy football player, I'm in. And obviously I love Jameis Winston as just a human being. And so I'm all in. I don't know about that. There's some troubling things in his past, but the character that he has, I would say, I'm in.
The NFL is a
Winston.
more interesting place with him.
That's fair. I think that's probably what I want to say. I don't want to co-sign on it, the human being part, because there's some interesting things, but we'll move on from that. I want to talk about a few. I want to talk about a few free agents, a few other ads not attached to injuries here. I've listed Bucky Irving in the waiver wire column now for couple weeks in a row, because of how inefficient Rachaad White has been on the ground. Among 58 backs with at least 10 carries heading into Monday Night Football, Irving is 10th in explosive run rate. White is 47th. Irving is 28th in negative run rate. White is 57th. Irving is 8th in yards after contact per run. White is 49th. And again, like I mentioned with the Watson stuff, this is just a continuation for what we've seen from Rachaad White. Now, coming out of this game in week 3, Todd Bowles said Irving has earned more work. I think we're going to continue to see Irving get more touches. Ultimately, I don't know if that matters for Irving's fantasy value. I want to add him. I want to see how this happens if I've got, a bench spot available, just to see where we go, especially since this is the kind of thing you have to get on early so that you save fab dollars if something were to happen and we were to see a big change. But White is still very good. All of his limitations in the running game, he's still very good in the passing game. And if this is more of a split with Bucky Irving getting early down work and White still as a receiver, I don't think that works out for Bucky Irving as a fantasy play, except for maybe deeper leagues. But I mean, that would be really bad news for White, because the reason you drafted Rachaad White is because of volume. And so it's a really interesting situation. I think Bucky Irving probably needs to be added as we see how this goes. I don't ultimately know what it'll come to, but again, this is the kind of thing you need to get in early on so you can save some fab dollars. Braylon Allen's another one of those. He's certainly not going to just take the role from Breece Hall. Breece Hall is very good, but Braylon Allen looks amazing behind Breece Hall. And I don't want anything to happen to Breece Hall. God forbid Breece Hall. I love Breece Hall. But if something were to happen to Breece Hall, Braylon Allen is the kind of guy that you would just spend a lot of fab dollars on based on what we've seen from him. And if you can just have that on your bench instead of having to make that ad, instead of having, I don't know, an extra tight end or an extra quarterback, as people like to carry, that's a roster move I would make. So those are two kind of running backs out there in a lot of leagues that I'm interested in for sure.
Yeah, I mean Bucky Irving's an interesting one. We talked about him week one, just how more efficient he's been than Rachaad White in the running game. And you draft Rachaad White because of his volume, because of his contributions in the pass game. You kind of look ahead, and Tampa Bay has the Eagles this week, who even though they played really well defensively against the Saints, a high flying Saints offense, they limited them to 89 yards, still 30th in the league in yards per carry is allowed. They I think allowed something like 7.8 yards per carry to the Packers in week one. It was over 7 again to Bijan Robinson in week two, and they finally kind of fixed things in week three. But it's a situation where if Bucky Irving gets going, if that defense looks more like it did the first 2 weeks as opposed to last week, he's someone whose value could really go through the roof if he has another big game at the expense of Rachaad White.
Some deep cuts as well. These are all players who are available in at least 95% of leagues. Some of them are available in 100% of leagues, and that is one of those is Tyler, which I've now figured out is pronounced Badie. I always called him Tyler Badie, which I like more because that's more fun for like a nickname social. He's a baddie, man. That's more fun for sure. But Tyler Badie, it's pronounced in the French way, the running back for the Broncos. We seem to see a bit of a change of guard in Denver. Javonte Williams had 1 carry in the second half to 8 for Badie. He overall had 9 carries for 70 yards. He's averaging 8.6 yards per attempt. Jaleel McLaughlin also had a good game, had a really nice run to get a touchdown. Williams still got passing snaps in the second half. I'm not going to assume that this offense is as good as they looked against Tampa Bay, even though that wasn't even that great, but it was still much better than we'd seen. I'm not going to assume we continue to see that. And so ultimately, maybe you're getting a running back that is part of a 3-headed committee and an offense that we're not really that excited about with Badie. But it is at least interesting that we saw this kind of changing the guard, especially since he's one of those guys that is probably available, even in all of us degenerates that play in leagues with massive benches where nobody is available. He's a guy that might actually be available. So Tyler Badie, someone to look at in that regard. Also, Roschon Johnson. Something has to change in the Chicago backfield. DeAndre Swift. I found the stat, and I don't want to. It's not all on DeAndre Swift, so I don't want to say that this is a terrible news for DeAndre Swift, but it is interesting that DeAndre Swift has as many 10-yard losses as he has 10-yard gains as a runner this season. It is one. He has one 10-yard run. He had a 20-yard run, and then he lost 12 yards at the goal line this past week. Again, that 12-yard loss wasn't even his fault, but it's just indicative of how little success the Bears have had as from a running perspective. You feel like they're going to have to make a change. We saw Roschon Johnson be active with Travis Homer on injured reserve, and he got a little more work. He ended up with 12 touches to 15 for DeAndre Swift. Khalil Herbert still got 3 goal-to-go carries, and so we'll have to see how that shakes out. That's been an interesting kind of subplot of this backfield, and so ultimately maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe this backfield's just so bad again, and it's 3-headed committee, and it doesn't matter. But Roschon Johnson, again, deeper league, someone to pay attention to. And then Trey Tucker. I'm not going to overreact to Trey Tucker going for 796 and 1 because the Raiders dropped back to throw 45 times with 40 attempts again in that game as they were chasing the Panthers. He only had 5 targets through 2 games, but he has been on the field for 75% of the dropbacks in those 2 games. And the Raiders have been shockingly pass heavy through 3 weeks. I have a neutral filter that I run in, as I'm looking through stats, which is just first 3 quarters and games within 2 scores. So try to just identify, all right, when teams are able to run their offense, how they want to run it, what are they doing? And the Raiders are 9th in dropback rate in that filter. And that's, given what we saw at the end of last season and given what Antonio Pierce seems to want to do, that's a shocking number. And if that continues, I don't know, maybe we see something from Trey Tucker. So those are 3 names available in a ton of leagues, probably available in your league, that if you're in a very deep spot, maybe take a look at those 3 guys.
Yeah, I mean, I try to load up my team with as many Tuckers as possible. Tucker Kraft, Justin Tucker. Add Trey Tucker to the mix. Can't go wrong, right? I mean,
yeah,
certainly a long shot, not necessarily an offense you want to bet on having success moving forward, but I just, what's the harm?
Yeah, you got a roster spot. You might as well use it on somebody. I did hear Antonio Pierce say today, leave open the possibility of a quarterback change. And I mean,
He
I
said
guess you got to
yesterday
make
players
change.
are making business decisions. So if they're going to start making business decisions, quickly went downhill in Las Vegas.
It has all devolved pretty quickly after last week. Gardner Minshew has not been great. This past game was not a good one, but the quality of targets he's been offering to Davante Adams, for instance, and those type of guys has been so much better than what they saw last year with Aiden O'Connell that I am a little bit worried if we switch to Aiden O'Connell. But of course, Aiden O'Connell's a young quarterback. Maybe he's gotten better. We'll see what happens. One more question here. What's the general feeling on Odunze and Caleb Williams progression? Someone dropped him after the first 2 weeks. I think you go out and get Odunze if he's available in your league. We'll see what happens with Keenan Allen and that injury, but like it just it didn't even seem like he was close to playing this week, Tucker. Like, is that kind of the feeling you got too?
Yeah, it felt like it was never even in question. It felt like he was out, and maybe it's because a little older, maybe because it takes him a little while. But I mean, he was banged up for a little while, and I almost said San Diego in Los Angeles the last couple of years. So yeah, I would be surprised maybe if he were immediately back full practice on Wednesday. I think best case scenario he's limited and works his way back into game shape by Sunday, but even that, it feels like maybe another week until we start getting positive news on Keenan Allen.
And I mean, Caleb Williams has to play better. It is what it is. We started to see, them actually move the ball through the air, which is, promising. But there were plays there for Odunze even before last week in this explosion. There were more plays available for Odunze in that game. He could have had a much bigger game there if we got, some more accurate throws from Caleb Williams, which you have to assume with his pedigree we'll see, although you would assume that with Bryce Young as well. So we'll see what happens there. But the fact that we saw progression, the fact that we've seen some growth is promising, and Odunze is definitely a talent. So yeah, if he's available, that's certainly someone I'm targeting. All right. That's it for us. Remember, we'll be back every single Monday 4 Eastern to talk about injuries, talk about waiver wire over at the Sharp Football Analysis YouTube page. Just search Sharp Football Analysis. You'll find us. You can also find us in your podcast feed of choice. So go and make sure you subscribe there. Head over to Sharp Football Analysis. You can find my waiver column, find Tucker's injury column. You can find a ton more, including Rich Rebar's worksheets, preview of every single game, every single week, available as part of our fantasy football package, which you can get for 25% off using promo code TAKE25. So make sure you do that. For Tucker, I'm Raymond. We'll be back to talk with you next week.